Prologue. The Ghost in the Ruins. Relis Prime, 3 years after the fall. The storms had never stopped, not since the night Kyle Varrock and Tiana of Shadow clashed beneath the broken moon, a duel of crimson fire that shattered the Sith temple and left the sky scarred forever. Silver fractures still drifted across the heavens like splintered bone. 17-year-old Keith Wolf, once Kyle Varrock, pulled his cloak tighter as he descended the jagged slope of obsidian stone. Behind him, a small Jedi expedition team followed. None wished to step deeper into the ruins than necessary. Most felt the lingering darkness. Only Keith felt something else, a tremor, a pulse. A familiar echo whispering just beneath the surface of his mind, a voice he had not heard in 3 long years. Tiana? He swallowed. Every search since that night had found the same thing. No body, no trace, no life. Just collapsed halls and the graves of forgotten Sith. Master Rentalis, his rescuer, his teacher, and the only Jedi who understood what lived inside him, placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "This is our first return to this place since the night we saved you," Talos said quietly. "You felt a call in the Force. That is why we are here, but be cautious. Echoes are not always truth." Keith stared into the hollowed ruin of the Sith temple, its broken pillars jagged against the storm-lit sky. "If the past is dead," he whispered, "why does it keep calling to me?" Talos didn't answer. Some truths were too old for the Jedi to name, some wounds too deep for the Force to hide. Chapter 1. The Jedi Path. The shuttle ascended through the atmosphere, leaving Relis Prime and its haunted ruins behind. Keith Wolf, 17, conflicted, half-trained in both darkness and light, watched the world shrink beneath the clouds. The Jedi believed he could be remade, purified, redeemed. Keith was not so sure. The Jedi Temple welcomed him, though he was older than most initiates. He learned meditation, patience, healing, things Sith acolytes were never taught. He studied under 4 masters, but only one reached him. Master Rentalis did not fear the darkness in him. He understood it, guided it. He never preached denial, only discipline. Never insisted on purity, only clarity. And Keith grew stronger. But each night when the temple grew silent, he still felt it. A flicker, a tremor, a breath of the girl who had once fought him beneath the shattered moon. Tiana? Sometimes it felt like memory. Sometimes it felt like she was still calling to him through the Force, and he didn't know which frightened him more. Chapter 2. The Path of Iron. The years that followed brought growth, but not peace. Keith admired the Jedi, but he never belonged. They feared the dark. He had lived in it. They taught serenity. He carried storms. So they taught detachment. He remembered love, pain, rage, and truth. At age 19, after 2 years of training, Keith Wolf made his choice. He walked out of the Jedi Temple without anger, without violence, without regret. He removed his blue lightsaber, his symbol of belonging, and left it on Master Talos' meditation stone. A final message lay beside it. "I cannot walk only one path. Thank you for showing me one of them." He traveled the Outer Rim, learned from Mandalorian clans, studied lost Force sects, forged his body, his purpose, and eventually his armor. Piece by piece, Keith Wolf shaped something neither Jedi nor Sith had words for: the way of the balance, the way of the Bendu. A Mandalorian enclave built not on fear of the dark or worship of the light, but on mastery of both, the path only he could walk. Chapter 3. The Fire That Listens. Keith Wolf had been wandering the Outer Rim long enough that his former Jedi robes had become little more than travel cloth, patched, sun-blasted, and re-dyed into something closer to Mandalorian practicality than monastic tradition. Freedom suited him, though it came with its own silence, its own storms. 6 months outside the Order, and he still woke expecting morning meditations and quiet halls. Instead, this morning began with the low groan of a windswept canyon on the moon of Piao. He stood at the edge of a ravine that breathed heat like a sleeping beast. The Jedi archives had mentioned the place only in fragments, unstable minerals faintly harmonic, occasionally harvested by artisans of unknown sects. Nothing about Khyber, nothing about danger, but something in the force had pulled him toward Piao for months, a low ember note that insisted it belonged to him. Keith exhaled and stepped into the canyon. Piao's caverns were unlike any he'd felt. The walls shimmered with mineral veins that pulsed in faint color when he passed, as if reflecting his presence. At times they flashed warm, at others cold, like they were breathing with him. He pressed deeper until the hum of the force sharpened. It was not like Khyber's clean, ringing clarity. This was rougher, layered, resonant, shifting between harmony and discord, like a flame trying to decide whether to flicker or roar. Keith slowed. The chamber ahead glowed orange. Nestled in the stone were two crystals, sister shards fused together by heat and pressure, yet distinctly separate. Their glow was not bright like a standard Khyber cluster. It was a burn, a smolder, steady and alive. He approached, reaching out with the force. The crystals reacted instantly. Light flared, stone cracked. A harmonic wail filled the chamber, neither welcoming nor hostile, simply truthful, demanding balance. Keith closed eyes and let the wave hit him. When the Jedi had rescued him 6 years ago, they taught him serenity, control, moderation. Those lessons still guided him, but they had never answered the storm inside him. The part that refused to be silenced, the part that sought strength, not for conquest, but survival. Now, in the glow of the crystals, he felt both sides meeting. Calm and flame, order and instinct. He whispered, "Show me." The crystal's heat surged but did not burn. Instead, the force opened like twin doorways, two paths converging. He saw memories, not from his life, but from the crystal's creation. Molten tunnels beneath Piao's crust. Minerals crushed under planetary weight. A lattice forming imperfectly. Not pure Khyber, but not lesser. Something adapted, something resilient, something born from pressure and imbalance. A reflection of him. Keith reached out and the crystals drifted into his palms, warm as living coals. The chamber went silent. He breathed, steady. Not Jedi calm, not Sith hunger. A new center, his center. The twin sabers. Keith's tools lay in his pack. Spare metal, plating, emitter rings salvaged from ruined temples and scavenger markets. Nothing matched, nothing was polished, but everything carried a story. He assembled the hilts by instinct, guided by the force and by the quiet certainty that these blades were meant to be twins, mirrors of each other, not in shape but in soul. When he set the crystals in place, the hilts vibrated softly, almost like an exhale. Keith ignited the first. A deep, molten orange blade snapped into existence, not fiery, not chaotic, controlled heat, the color of a smoldering forge. He lit the second. Its tone harmonized with the first, in a warm, low chord that resonated through the chamber. He stood there for a long time, listening. These were not Jedi weapons, not Sith blades, not tied to any creed but his own. They were the beginning of something new, an identity forming from the ashes of everything he had survived. Keith deactivated the sabers and clipped them to his belt. For the first time in years, he knew exactly where he was walking, not back to the Order, not into darkness, into his path, into the shadows and through them. Chapter 4, The First Flames of the Enclave. 7 years after Relis Prime, 6 months after Keith left the Jedi Order, the forests of Varos 4 whispered with the breath of early dawn as Keith Wolf moved silently through the undergrowth, a borrowed set of Mandalorian scout armor clinging to him like a second skin. For years he had walked among the clans, hunting, training, forging himself into something stronger, something steadier, something balanced. The Mandalorians respected power, but revered purpose. Keith was learning to carry both. This mission, however, was different. A distress call from a downed refugee skiff had drawn his squad into disputed territory. Raiders prowled the valleys, slavers stalked the rivers. The Mandalorians expected hostiles. What they found instead were children. Keith was the first to reach the shattered skiff. Smoke hissed from the hull and scorched durasteel still glowed with fading heat. Movement flickered inside, shallow breaths, desperate but alive. He tore open the crumpled hatch. A boy stared back at him, wild-eyed and shaking, clutching a jagged metal rod in both hands as though it were a sword. His hair was matted with dust. His lip was split. But his stance was steady, defensive, determined, not afraid. "Easy," Keith said, lowering his hands. "We're here to help." The boy did not blink. Everyone else is dead. The words were too calm for someone so young. Keith sensed the truth immediately. A fire inside him, dark but not corrupted, raw but non-controlled. A spark waiting for guidance. What's your name? Keith asked. The boy hesitated. Dara Juno. Keith offered his hand. You're safe now, Dara. Come with us. The boy did not take the hand, but he stood and followed. Even then, Keith understood. This child would grow into a blade unlike any other. 6 months later, Keith felt the tremor. Not danger, a call. A soft, luminous pulse in the force, guiding him through the high canyons of the Mandalorian frontier. His fellow warriors followed without question. By now, Keith's intuition had saved more lives than any sensor grid. They found her perched atop a broken stone pillar overlooking the valley. A tiny girl, 6 years old at most, clutching her knees, eyes bright with unshed tears, yet glowing with something deeper, something gentle, something unbroken. She looked up the moment Keith approached. You heard me, she whispered. Her voice trembled with relief, not fear. Keith knelt to meet her eyes. Are you alone? She nodded. My family's gone, but the Force told me someone would come. Keith felt it, like a soft hand placed in his own. Warm, pure, hopeful. What's your name? He asked. Ryan, she said. Ryan O'Hall. Dara, standing to Keith's right, crossed his arms and muttered, We're collecting strays now. Keith hid a smile. Seems the balance thinks we're ready. He wrapped Ryan in his cloak, lifting her gently. She didn't flinch. She simply rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, I knew you'd find me. They returned to the Mandalorian stronghold with 2 children. One born of fire, the other of light. Keith watched them train, watched them grow, watched them orbit each other like twin suns pulled into the gravity of his teachings. Dara learned discipline first. Ryan learned purpose first, and both learned balance. The way of the Bendu was no longer just Keith's path. It was becoming a legacy, a family, a future enclave waiting to be forged. Chapter 5. The Little Droid of Fire and Memory. 3 years after Keith joined the Mandalorians. 7 years after Relis Prime. The mountains of Carvaros glowed bronze beneath the dying sun as Keith Wolf crossed the ridge with 2 small figures at his side. Dara Juno, 9 years old, sharp-eyed and quietly intense, walked with the stubborn steadiness of someone determined not to fall behind. Ryan O'Hall, 6, restless and bright, rolled a river stone between her palms, repeating the breathing forms Keith had taught her to calm her energy. It had been a year since they officially became his apprentices. A year of lessons, mistakes, triumphs, and chaos. The Mandalorians called them the Little Wolves. Keith never denied it. They were returning from a scouting route when Ryan suddenly stopped mid-step. Master Keith, she whispered, her head tilting. Something's calling. Dara snorted. She thinks everything calls to her. Trees, rocks, stray lizards. I do not, she protested, but Keith felt it too, a faint, persistent ping beneath the surface of the Force. Mechanical, not organic. Old, but not gone. Come, he said. They descended into a shattered ravine where twisted metal glinted among dust and stone. As Keith swept debris aside, more was revealed. The starboard engine of an old Z-95 headhunter, half crumpled and ground into the earth from a long-ago crash. Ryan gasped. Dara frowned. Keith knelt slowly. Next to the cockpit, long since collapsed inward, lay a small BD series droid, curled beside a weathered skeleton still strapped into a pilot's harness. The droid's white and blue frame was cracked, one of its sensor lenses dark, its limbs stiff with corrosion. But its hands rested on the fallen pilot's boot, as if refusing to leave him even as years passed. A loyal guardian, in silence. Keith brushed dust from the droid's chassis. Faded lettering read, BD-77. Exploration Unit, Ryan's voice trembled. He stayed with him. All this time. Dara's expression shifted, less dismissive, more respectful. He didn't abandon him, even when it happened. Keith placed a hand gently on BD-77's shell. He wasn't waiting to be found, Keith murmured. He was keeping watch. And somewhere deep inside the droid, a flicker, a spark, a memory refusing to die. He's still alive, Keith said. Back at the Mandalorian encampment, the headhunter wreck was dragged in piece by piece. The body of BD-77's former master, now no more than sun-bleached bone, was given Mandalorian rights, despite being an outsider. Any warrior who dies alone and unforgotten deserves a fire and a name, Clan Vizsla said. The techs crowded around BD-77 with fascination. Mara Vizsla, clan mechanic, whistled softly as she lifted a scan reader. This little scrap is ancient, older than my Buer's armor. Dara leaned forward. How old? About 122 standard years. Ryan's eyes went wide. He is history. BD-77's internal systems had entered a survival hibernation after the crash. His power cell half melted, his memory filaments scorched. But pieces remained. Keith studied the dented hull of the Z-95. The markings suggested a lone courier or explorer, hit by pirates from the angles of the burns. His master survived the crash, Mara noted quietly, but not for long. Ryan wiped her eyes. BD-77 stayed with him. Dara nodded. Loyalty like that, that's rare. Keith rested a hand on the little droid again. You don't abandon family, he murmured. He knew that. Reviving BD-77 took nearly a week. New power core, repaired photoreceptors, untangled memory lines, a little Mandalorian engineering. A little force-guided intuition. Keith barely slept. The kids didn't either. Finally, on the 7th night, the last cable slid into place. Mara flipped the stabilizer switch. For a moment, nothing. Then, a spark, a click, a soft, uncertain whir, chirp. BD-77's optitis fluttered. A bright blue lens ignited. Ryan squealed and hugged him instantly. Dara folded his arms but couldn't hide the faint smile when BD-77 nudged his knee. Finally, the droid turned toward Keith. Its scanner swept his face. A soft, emotional trill sounded. Half recognition, half bonding. Keith smiled softly. Welcome back, little one, he said. You're safe now. BD-77 hopped lightly onto Keith's shoulder and tapped twice against his armor plate. I'm home. From that day onward, BD-77 never left Keith's side. Scout, helper, confidant. A spark of ancient loyalty carried into a new age. And though legends would someday call him a bearer of light among only 3 droids in Enclave history, for now, he was simply a friend found in the ashes, and the beginning of a story still unfolding. Chapter 6. The wolf who passed through the veil. The single son of Vornkesh sank behind the jagged basalt cliffs, staining the world in molten gold. Keith Wolf barely noticed the beauty of the dying light. The force was pulling at him, not nudging, not whispering, summoning. It throbbed through the air like a heartbeat too large for the world. Ryan and Dara felt it first. Children always sensed the force's truths before adults learned to distrust them. Ryan's voice trembled. Master, something's wrong. Dara swallowed, jaw tight. It's like we're standing in thunder before it hits. Keith didn't answer because words were useless. The force wasn't warning him about an approaching storm. It was the storm, and somewhere beyond the veil of what mortals were meant to feel, something old was waiting for him. The death of a leader. The Mandalorian loudspeakers shuddered to life. Intruder sighted! East Range! All warriors. Defense stance. Keith's body moved before thought could form. Ryan and Dara were swept away by trainees as he sprinted toward the columns of smoke rising like black spears into the sky. Sparks burst from shattered power nodes. Flames licked the towers. The metallic stink of scorched Beskar hung like poison on the wind, and in the center of the chaos, Thorn Vizsla fought alone. His armor, etched by decades of war, clashed against a figure cloaked in shadow, a blade of crimson carved arcs of death around them. Not Sith, not Inquisitor. The presence felt colder, older, like a wound in the Force wearing flesh. Keith leapt, too late. The dark Jedi's blade punched through Thorn's cuirass with a brutal, decisive thrust. Thorn sagged against Keith as he caught him, heavy as a mountain, warm as family. Wolf? Thorn's voice rasped through the inside of his helm, already fading. Listen, the clan needs a leader of balance. Not only warrior, not only Jedi, not only Sith. His gauntlet pressed weakly against Keith's chest plate, right where the heart sits. You are the bridge, Vod. From this day, Clan Vizsla yields to Clan Graywolf. He shoved a signet into Keith's palm, his final act, and went still. The world tilted. Keith bowed over him as the force tore open inside his ribs, shuddering with a grief so sharp it bordered on rage. And in that rupture, something ancient answered. The dark Jedi turned, reflecting the burning camp like a warped mirror. A loyal dog kneeling over a dying relic, he hissed. Come, Let us see what your balance is worth. Keith ignited both orange blades and the universe stopped. Ash froze mid-whirl. Flames halted like painted illusions. The screaming metal, the shouts, the alarms, gone. Keith swallowed and found himself somewhere impossible. White light, black shadow. Infinity braided into a single pathway, the world between worlds. Faint echoes flickered at the edges, lives unlived, choices unmade, futures waiting to be born. And ahead, the father towering and serene, the daughter radiant as dawn, the son darkness coiled into living form. Keith fell to one knee. A voice thundered through his marrow. You walk where others divide. You do not worship light nor fear darkness. You carry both, and so you may enter. Power flooded him, not blinding, not corrupting, but balancing. Amber white fire laced through his veins. Visions crashed over him. How to calm rage, how to channel shadow without surrender, how to wield light without naivety, how to be the fulcrum in a galaxy of absolutes, how to be the bridge. When he gasped for breath, the ones faded like smoke. The path beneath his feet pulsed once. Reality shattered back into place, and the battle resumed. Keith's blades roared back to life, orange cores streaked with veins of black and white, the visible manifestation of balance. The dark Jedi recoiled. What have you become? Keith didn't answer. He moved. Not fast. Inevitable. Grief sharpened his strikes. Purpose guided his blocks. The Force did not flow through him. It moved with him. The Dark Jedi fought with ferocity, hurling jagged Force waves, screaming fury into every blow. Keith absorbed the rage like a tide absorbs stone, redirecting, softening, returning. Their blades clashed in showers of molten sparks. The ground split beneath the shockwaves. Armor cracked, flames swirled around them as if drawn to the balance between them. Keith's voice finally broke through the clash. You took my father. The Dark Jedi laughed, wild and manic. Loss is the only truth, boy. Keith's eyes glowed, molten amber white. Then let me show you the truth beyond it. 3 strikes. Keith forced him back. 4. He broke through the guard. 5. He ripped the weapon free. The Dark Jedi stumbled, staring up in horror. What are? Keith's blade cut the question short. The intruder fell. Silence rippled outward. Warriors of Vornkesh, hardened, disciplined, unshakable, stood frozen. Ryan and Dara ran to him, tearful and shaking. Keith sheathed his blades and knelt to hold them, his voice raw but steady. It's all right, he whispered. I will carry this burden. I will carry all of you. He stood. Thorn's signet hung at his belt. Balance burned in his eyes, and one by one, Mandalorians knelt, not to a Jedi, not to a Sith, but to the man who had walked through the veil and returned forged anew. Keith Wolf, a law of Clan Graywolf, and the galaxy would remember. The wolf who entered the dark and returned carrying the dawn.